We have a panel now on just to send you off on a positive and energized note to make sure that you leave this place feeling like you're not alone in your work, that solutions to what seem like impossible problems are indeed doable, and that you are in the company of a great community to support you in this work. And don't be afraid to reach out to them and learn from them and ask them for help. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to each of our panelists. We have Lee Miller, the Director of Innovation and Compliance at Barton Community College in Kansas. And Lee is one of the usual suspects at most OER convenings. So you've probably all seen or heard from Lee in the past, and she's tireless again in her efforts. Amanda Hurford, Scholarly Communications Director for the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana, PALNI, and she's done amazing stuff. There's a lot more going on at the private institutions as far as OER work goes in Indiana than in any of our other states. So very huge accomplishment. And Vince, is it Mussehl or Mussehl? Mussehl, okay. Project Director, Affordable Learning, Chippewa Valley Technical College in Wisconsin. And Vince also is someone who you've probably heard from a lot. He does a lot of online OER 101 courses and just does a lot to further the cause of OER, especially in Wisconsin, but across the nation as well. So thank you all. I have some questions to get you started here. So the first thing I would love to hear from each of you is just a very brief summary of the statewide efforts for OER in your state and how that work is organized.
I can start. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, sorry, through the lens of the Wisconsin Technical College system, otherwise referred to as WTCS for today. So what's interesting about WTCS is that we're 16 separate institutions and we don't have like a governing system above us. We have the state that sets policies and provides funding, but each of those institutions are different and differently governed. So we're kind of all going rogue individually and we come together for things like this. So through the lens of WTCS, OER really got onto people's radar when my institution, Chippewa Valley, was awarded one of the open textbook pilot grants. So I know I've been talking about this throughout the conference, but in 2019, we were awarded a $2.5 million grant to develop nursing content and OER. And that project really went much further than nursing. So I think it really helped to inspire other programs, especially the gen ed courses, that OER was possible and we're motivated and we want to do more of this. So that really helped us kind of scale up. The OpenRN project is very large. It's much larger than I thought it would be. You have 300 people participating in that project, and that was just for the 5 textbooks initially. So all 300 of those people became champions of OER in one way or another. So that's one of the ways that we scaled up. And then this really got the attention of everyone, faculty, students, administrators. They turned their eye towards us and said, hey, this makes sense. This is something we can all get behind. And then it just kind of took off from there.
I can go next. So my name is Amanda Hurford, and as Jenny mentioned, I'm the Scholarly Communications Director for PALNI. And PALNI is the Private Academic Library Network of Indiana. We support 24 private institutions from all over our state. So we kind of have a similar situation to what Vince mentioned, in that I can speak to the OER efforts from my lens, which is the private institutions, but I am also joined by my colleagues here at some of the individual institutions that are part of PALNI, and then we also have our community college system and the Indiana University system. And we have recently come together as a group. Well, we've been doing this since the original convening, but we've had different characters come in and out of our group. And I feel like we've really coalesced around this core group, and I'm so excited to be here today to continue working with these folks, and I feel sort of reinvigorated for the statewide effort now that we're here together. But a little bit about the PALNI program. So I run the PAL Save program, which is supported by a grant from the Lilly Endowment. back in 2019, recently after we got back from the original MHEC Summit, we applied for a grant from the Lilly Endowment for about $500,000 to support our OER efforts at Pawnee. And we've since renewed some of the stipend funding for an additional $250,000. So we've got lots of great funding from the Lilly Endowment to support some really important aspects of our work, which are a lot of faculty-facing things. So we support course reviews, course redesign grants, and textbook creation grants, all as part of our program. And we also support the professional development efforts of our librarians and instructional designers and even some faculty across the Pawnee network. So we kind of have this multi-pronged approach where we're offering funding, but then also really supporting the local folks who are able to roll this out at our institutions.
All right, I'll wrap us up on this one. So we actually pretty much started, I think, from the first MEC convening. So a group of people from KBOR and at least one representative. So Brian Linshield was, I know, one of the original group that was able to attend. And when they came back, they decided that that was something that was needed for the state of Kansas, and they developed the OER steering committee, which we now have today. With that in mind, we did, when we first kind of came together and kind of wanted to go ahead and start identifying what we wanted to do, we did have quite a bit of focus on the faculty in terms of how could we provide additional support that was going to go across all institutions regardless of how their initiative or lack of initiative may present. So we did recognize that there was multiple levels across multiple institutions, anywhere from nothing to fully run OER initiatives, and we wanted to kind of provide something that was across all things. We also recognize this is probably one interesting space where community college and universities are very, very, very highly collaborative, and we really, really appreciate that, and so we really embrace that space as well. Some of the highlights that we've done right now in terms of just a series of webinars and faculty trainings. We've done some discipline focus so that we can really get into the nuances of where some people's interests are, as well as we have done one recent summit, which was really, really successful. We were really happy with the way it happened. So that's a little bit of what's happened in Kansas.
Thank you all. All right, next question. What are the most important elements a state team should have in place to support your work? What kinds of support systems or infrastructure have you built to support open education in your state?
I'll go first again. And I'm going to apologize to those. Nicole taught me today that stakeholders has a colonial origin, but I have that in here like 6 times, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to change it to affected parties yet. But I did learn something today. Thank you. So I really have to say the most important element is good communication. So as librarians, well, not all of us are librarians. I'm a librarian by trade. I was a library director just up until the end of last year. I think we are very passionate about what we do and we're very knowledgeable, but we're not always the best communicators. So I think kind of honing in on that skill or partnering with someone that complements to you, I think is really important. We needed to listen to many different institutions to see what barriers were preventing courses from moving towards OER or their goals. But then we also wanted to learn what their successes were through that communication so we could share with others. We needed to find out what our parties needed. In our case, it was professional development, human support, such as librarians, instructional designers, peer reviewers, et cetera. But then, of course, like everyone else here, was funding or compensation. So with the good communication, we were able to work with our student government, and they were able to successfully advocate for state funding for our work. So last summer, Wisconsin awarded our technical colleges $3 million to further open education, which is something that wouldn't have been possible without good communication and advocacy, as we learned from Nicole today. So obviously funding is important to build open education, but advocacy through the form of professional development has also been important. I was talking to some of my roundtables today about OER 101, and I know Jenny mentioned it, but we offer a free OER 101 course. We incentivize many people for taking it, not everyone. And this really has helped to create champions, hundreds of champions that otherwise wouldn't have even known about it. So I think kind of just making sure that people are on the same page through communication in that way. And then when they're done with this training, we tell them to continue the conversation by attending a symposium or a summit that we have one of each in Wisconsin. One that caters to the 2 years and one to the 4 years. So keep that momentum going is how we've done it.
Thanks, Vince. I'll definitely say yes and to communication. It's really important to communicate what you're doing at the consortial level and to have contacts at each of the institutions that you're working with. We have a network of primary contacts for our PALSAVE program. So we make sure that there's a list where we have one person at each institution who's responsible for receiving the information and pushing it out to faculty or whoever else needs to get that information. And similarly, we also have a committee we call our PALSAVE admin team, who is a group of highly active librarians in this space who kind of serve as the doers for what we're doing. So like when we have ideas for making these things happen, to actually execute them and help us make a plan. And then also just to sort of serve in an advisory capacity too, like, is this a good idea? What's the best way to go about certain things? And this group was a lot more active in the early part of our program, kind of just figuring out how is this all going to work. We have lots of different elements that we know have worked in other scenarios, but like what is going to work for us? And another important thing that I wanted to mention as far as important elements in infrastructure is expanding our communities, not just across our institutions, our consortium, but like who else has already done these things and can we learn from? And that might kind of provide structure for how to do this OER thing. And we found the Open Education Network to be a really huge part of that. It was great to join that community and to get basically a map of how do you do OER. So, you know, we learned from them about the importance of building awareness and engaging, and then also having that incentive piece when you're working with faculty to just sort of get your foot in the door is a really important part of it. And similarly, we've joined the Library Publishing Coalition to learn lots of really important things about publishing and how to get involved in that community. So just sort of the technical infrastructure that I wanted to mention is we do have press books. We do have the Samvera-based haiku repository as a PALSAVE repository that we're building out. I think that's all I wanted to mention. Thanks.
So in terms of the important element, I'm gonna say people. With the right people on the right bus, you can do a lot with very little funding. And I think we've seen a lot of proof of that across some of the conversations I've had here today. Also recognizing the power of an invitation. So even though you don't have something that you can give them back, sometimes just the opportunity is good enough. And the power of an invitation of, hey, I see what you're doing and I think it's important. And having that small recognition, I think you ought to come join us and help us in this space. Even if it's only in alignment with value, right? So you may see something that they're doing that isn't OER based, but it aligns with the values that we have. And you can kind of provide that little bit of education and then invite them to what they're doing next. One of the things I think we've done really well in the expansion over kind of the last 2 years is we've invited a lot of train the trainer type of things and integrated, even though people aren't on the steering committee, we invest in them in terms of participating in either subcommittees or even extensions of like other types of webinars, or invite people to lead those type of discipline specific courses and that sort of thing. So we don't look at trying to have all the expertise. We try to spread that around as deep as we can. And that's been extremely successful in that aspect. And then last but not least is the needs of your audience. When you just kind of pause and can kind of look at what that is, and then you can move towards it with them in mind, and not necessarily just the goal of OER, can make a really, really big difference in terms of the conversation is on them and not on you. So.
Great, thank you. The next question I have for you is, what have been some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, I guess thinking about some of our biggest, probably our biggest has been getting all of our affected parties on the same page. So despite all the learning activities that we have, our opportunities, whether it's through the OER 101 that I mentioned, the different conferences, whether it's presenting to technical college board or a department meeting, it can still be hard to rein them in and for them to understand OER. We have a lot of turnover. We have administrators. They have competing priorities. If you don't talk to them about OER for a year, they forget what it even is. So that's been like a big challenge for us, I think, is getting them on the same page. I think just continuing the conversation or that regular and frequent communication is what's important. Right now, at this point, I'm still concerned where our funding is going to come from in 2 years. Like, where are we going to get it? How is this going to work? And I hope to have that resolved. That was something that we're working on as our team action plan. So stay tuned.
When I reflected on this question about challenges, the first thing I thought of was the COVID-19 pandemic. This was a huge challenge, and of course it still is. But it started at about the same time that we started really rolling out our efforts to affect change in OER at our institutions. So we know what some of the impacts have been from our programming, or, we see the change over time. But all of that is slightly tinged with what was the COVID effect on all that as well? So I think it might have been a blessing in disguise that we had this programming ready at the time that everyone went online. There was a lot less in-person teaching, so we were available to give that information to a lot of faculty to help them make that transition, or to at least have that information in the back of their head when they're thinking about the best curricular materials to support an online environment. So that's one challenge that immediately came to mind. Another is the lack of capacity at the local level. A lot of the institutions that we work with really do rely on central programming because they wear many different hats and don't have the time to devote to, going to trainings and to engaging with their faculty at the level that they would like to about OER. So that has been a consistent challenge, but one that we've been able to, I think, address and partially overcome in the fact that we do provide central programming. We do webinars that any of the faculty from all of our schools can attend. I mentioned that we send a lot of our librarians and instructional designers to conferences and trainings to build up their skills. And just kind of have that open line of communication for what it is that we're doing and easy ways to engage with our programming.
So I'm going to reiterate that capacity. And I think it was something we recognized early on, which is why we went ahead and expanded and wanted to involve more people in the aspect of just weighing that out and kind of getting more people involved. And it's, I think, as most of what I've heard here, there's a lot of voluntary aspects and people where this is in addition to a job. There's not a lot of where people are doing this as a job. And so I think that recognition of how can you spread that capacity out and invest a little bit is something we're still working on, but also something just to keep in mind. But then as everybody else, funding, state funding, yes, which I think is just a continued conversation. But one of the things that we struggle with is looking at grants. But when, if we try to apply even as a state and we're competing with other states, Kansas's ROI is not going to compete with New York or California. It's just not. And our recognition of that is just what it is. So our opportunity and where other states are in that similar boat is where are there opportunities for states to collaborate, or multiple states to collaborate? Because those are the only spaces, I think, where we're going to be able to get those types of opportunities. So, and maybe that is at the, the MHEC level where, Midwest is probably experiencing a lot of that same type of thing. So yeah, those are some of our challenges.
Thank you. Well, my phone decided to go to a different screen, so here we go. All right, my next question is what kinds of mechanisms do you have in place or plan to have in place to sustain the statewide work?
Yeah, so right now in WTCS, we're using grant funds to develop these tangible materials. But during that time, while I'm project director, I'm going to be building a framework for sustainability. What I'm hoping is that long-term we'll form a consortium amongst the technical colleges that will pay a set amount towards the work that we're doing at a central level. things like OER librarian, instructional designer, directing these projects, that sort of thing, I would hope would sustain the projects that we've already created. Any new projects, because we have a lot of ambitious writers out there in Wisconsin, we would hope to be funded by grants. So the state of Wisconsin, for example, if they continue their funding that they gave us this first round, we'll use that towards new projects, and same with any additional grants that we might receive. But I think that if we can still attach, so what we do, one of the things that we do for OpenRN is we attach a small royalty to the print textbooks. And that's just like $3 to $5 to cover sustaining. And that adds up to almost nothing. But it's enough to pay peer reviewers for review time. So tiny things like that. We're never going to be a break-even organization, but having something in place that we're demonstrating that we're trying, I think has been helpful too.
In thinking about sustainability with our project, I think the most important thing to ensure that we keep doing our efforts is keeping my position, which is funded through the Pawnee central budget. My position isn't grant funded, so I will definitely be continuing in this capacity for the near future, at the very least. And we are continuing to pursue additional grant funding for our projects. And I'm really viewing the tapering off of our current grant funding as an opportunity to reshape how our OER programming is going to look in the future. So in the past, when we were first starting out in 2018, 2019, it was all about building awareness. You know, we drew on a lot of stats about how faculty were largely not aware of OER, and that has changed greatly in the last 5 years. Now faculty are really aware of OER and want to know about other ways to engage with it, like open pedagogy and things like that. So this is a really good opportunity for us to go back to our committees, talk to our library directors, and hear about needs, about high impact things that we can do for the future. I mentioned open pedagogy. We can also do more advocacy efforts, things like course marking and doing additional efforts in textbook creation. So that's one thing that I'm really excited about to ensure the sustainability of our program. I also wanted to think about the importance of communicating impact. That's something that we've tried to do along the way in our program, is to every year put out an infographic of our impact, things like how much money we've saved, our impacts on student success and things like that. So I think having those statistics at the ready for additional grant fund applications is going to be a really important thing too.
So in terms of sustainability, we are fortunate to be with KBOR in terms of having liaison and the connection to that, so that helps with that piece. But just to reiterate, in terms of capacity, is we have a co-chair system that is working really, really well in terms of being able to rotate off 1 year and then rotate on to keep that legacy and that type of thing, as well as the leadership structure that I kind of articulated earlier in terms of spreading that leadership out, of having other co-leads across the steering committee that are leading subcommittees, and then passing that on down. And so in sustainability, that's kind of probably my key point there. But we're also not necessarily looking at just where, dare I say, sustainability in terms of survival, but also moving towards thriving. And where can we do that in terms of kind of expansion? And so capacity building, we do have a legislative ask in terms of getting some monetary types of funding. And then just where can we bring more people into the conversation? And so like our conversation today really kind of rested on where can we have more conversation with K-12. So it's going to be kind of our new general direction as we can go for that, for at least maybe the next year or so. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, my last question. What is one piece of advice you would give other state teams for how to keep people engaged and motivated?
Yeah, so I guess my biggest piece of advice would be to advocate, as we kind of talked about this morning, right? And we can do that through education, I think. So spread the word on OER, whether it's in a free online course, such as the one that we offer. It might be workshops at in-service, a presentation to university regents or community college boards. Education is important, and this awareness piece is important at all levels. And we really want to keep that going to build our OER armies, right? Like we want to make sure that's sustained. But then again, I go back to what I said initially, make sure that when we're doing this, when we're spreading the word, we're doing it with passion, but also compassion, because, you know, OER is new for a lot of people, and new means scary, and it can mean, it can be painful. So got to have that compassion piece and just remember where we're at with it, so.
I would definitely echo that. And also to say, think about ways to make this sort of programming approachable and make it as uncomplicated as possible. So having talking points at the ready, having infographics, things that are easily shared, I think makes this kind of work a lot more engaging and less daunting of like, oh gosh, I can't do that because I don't have time. So what are ways that you can make it easier for folks? And then also, like I mentioned, at the beginning of this session, I do feel really energized after meeting in person today. So I would recommend, if at all possible, when you're assembling your teams, that you have a good group that you can share with, and to make sure that you allow that sustained time for planning and just sort of talking with each other and getting to know each other as people rather than just little faces on a screen, I think is really important as well.
So the first one is remember your why. Sometimes we get buried in what we do, that sometimes we forget why we're doing it. And that's where we kind of draw that inspiration and that passion from. So I guess, you know, whenever we get in those spaces, remember, you know, that reason, that why that we, you know, are here today. And then don't be afraid to innovate and ask the question where you can. In many ways, we're kind of at a tipping point of where can we go? What's the next conversation? And I would just urge you all to kind of ask that question of yourselves, and where can we innovate to, you know, progress that? And maybe that's, you know, not necessarily completely in front of us. Maybe that's, you know, behind some layer or another opportunity or another type of partnership or conversation. And then last but not least, I'm going to share something that I learned that I thought was an interesting perspective shift. So many people talk about ROI and the concept of just where we get when we do revest, but what happens when we don't do anything? And so the term that was used was COI, cost of inaction. So when people are really, really persisting and pushing, it's like, no, we can't do that. We don't have to fight. I was like, well, then maybe turning that around and say, okay, if that's the case and that's where you stand, well, what does that decision actually look like? Like, what's possible outcomes that could come into? Because we all know higher education is changing, but one of the things I always talk about at my institution is we can either design the change that we want to see, or we're going to have to accept the change that's handed to us. And so we might as well have a voice if it's going to change anyways. So
Those are great suggestions and pieces of advice. Thank you so much. I'm opening it up now. We have 15 minutes approximately to have some questions and answers and discussion. Does anyone?
Potential solutions or like, do you have any potential solutions for, say, declining faculty enthusiasm for OER, where there may still be some people who are very enthusiastic, some people who are reliably continuing to participate in OER, but it's been 5 years since maybe some faculty adopted OER, and now they're reworking their course, and this time around, course materials do not include OER.
I'll go ahead and jump in on that one. So one of the things I'll just speak where we have at our institution is really, and I don't know what you do, and I'm going to ask to start with a question. How do you talk about OER? Do you talk about it in terms of affordability and access as the goal? Primarily, okay. So that would be the shift I would recommend. So that is a student outcome, and the faculty can't see themselves in that outcome because they have to do the work. So if you can identify what value OER has for them, so for us, it's instructional goals and what I refer to as authentic instructional freedom. So the freedoms they have that's not tied to a single published textbook allows them a lot more opportunity to design the course they want, which really does open conversations with instructional designers and any, you know, ideas of what you want to do that, especially around open pedagogy. So when you can identify their needs and their goals, they literally see the value and can invest, and then student affordability and accessibility become an outcome of their work.
Another suggestion I can make comes from a newer member to our team, Andrea Bierman, who's here today. She's an instructional designer, and I've been thinking more and more about the importance of involving instructional designers in the OER conversation from the beginning. So if you can get faculty to meet with an instructional designer and have that conversation when they're thinking about designing courses or redesigning courses, that can just be part of sort of the cycle. And then I would also recommend trying to build new champions with new faculty as they start at your institution, kind of building that into the orientation that they go through, making sure that they're aware of whatever OER program exists at your institution, and that they're aware of any incentives or what the sort of program looks like that they might get involved in.
I feel obligated to give a response now. I guess my question is, well, maybe not a question. If your institution has the capacity for some sort of sustainability, maintenance, we call it maintenance at our institution, and it's a very small amount for them to kind of keep it going after 3 to 5 years, depending on curriculum review and so forth. That's been one way to keep them engaged in it. They don't get the initial incentive that they did to begin with, but even that small amount, I think a lot of times when we're talking about faculty incentives, it's not always about money. It's about their time. So even if they spend 300 hours on a project and get $150, I feel like they're like, this is something. So I think even having those small amounts can go a long way.
I'll also add a few things. At some institutions, they're working it into promotion and tenure. And I do feel like that is an important emphasis that more and more of us can look toward as a way to keep faculty engaged in the long term. The Doers 3 organization has a good guide to that, and it's definitely something that I see happening in more places. Another thing is celebrating them and making it visible that they're doing this thing for students. So I don't know if some of the folks who've worked with the folks in Massachusetts, they at the end of the year have what's called the OER Oscars. And it's literally, I think they even have a statewide one now, but it used to be at individual institutions, but there's actually a statewide OER Oscars where they bring in their OER champions, and there are these different ways that they receive accolades among their peers within the state. But there's also something that happens at the institutional level. I know Ohio Link at one point made little door hangers, and everyone who used, for the doorknobs, they put them on their doors at the faculty offices. There are a lot of things that you can do that acknowledge, and because students really appreciate this, but they don't always know who's doing it. So you might not ever take a biology course, but you really appreciate the guy or the person who does that. And again, it's spreading out that those accolades, those kudos. So those are just some of the things that I've observed too.
I might add, Abby has expanded on that to Doers tenure and promotion, I
Oh,
believe.
Excellent. Abby left already, but
That's
yes.
out there too.
Good, thank you.
I was gonna build on what you're saying, Jenny. Amanda and her team made stickers for the PalSave program, and one might think, oh, faculty are adults and don't care about stickers.
Everyone cares about stickers.
They love the stickers. They love the stickers, and I don't know how much they cost, but I don't think it was a lot. So just wanted to mention that stickers were a hit.
Yeah.
They had cat puns like save money, right? Meow or something like that.
Yeah. Something else that we've talked about at MHEC, and we haven't done it yet because I already have like 10,000 projects at once, but we're thinking about some badging. and you can do that at your individual level too. So it's something that can go on their institutional profile. It can go on LinkedIn. It can go on their Vita. I mean, there are a lot of things where and I was thinking about that with just OER education, building like a sequence or something that is visible, it's demonstrable, it's just something. I mean, honestly, it's the thing that says, I care about students, I care about instruction, because I mean, really, that's kind of a generational thing we're dealing with too, is we're transitioning from a higher ed system where instruction wasn't always, well, maybe not the community colleges, probably always has been, but at the 4 years, being a great instructor has not always been highly emphasized, and it's rarely rewarded. That's changing, but it's not visible. Think about it. So much of the classroom stuff happens outside. Your peers probably don't know. How do you teach? What do you teach? You know? So it's, again, making visible these things that you're doing. And if they don't want to make it visible, which, you know, they might not feel comfortable doing that, but we can do that. So maybe some ideas.
What are you most excited about?
This was easy for me. I'm excited about what we did this trip and then going to apply it in a few months from now. So me and my team, Wisconsin over there, came up with some great ideas that I think is going to be like a game changer for us. So that's what I'm excited about.
For me, it's on the innovation side. And so, you know, where are we going next? And I think there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of investing in new sectors, looking at where we can expand, you know, who have we not had conversations with. So yeah, it's the innovation aspect.
I'm definitely excited about everything that we've talked about here today and over the last couple of days. I'm excited to engage greater at the state level, not just within our private institutions, but beyond, and to follow up with a lot of you. We've had some really great conversations. And I'm thinking a lot about kind of the close of an era with our current grant that we're phasing out and, you know, writing up our final reports for. I am one of those people who really loves to write a final report, just to be like, look at all of the things that we did, and to share out a lot of the accomplishments that we've had, and then also just to sort of look at the future and decide what's important for us next, and where can we go from here.
That's great.
Too.
What am I? Well, I'm excited about all of the ideas I got from, you know, listening in on all the conversations and all the presentations. I've filled up my little notebook back there. So I always get excited about, oh gosh, there's this thing I could actually kind of sort of do and maybe do it well, hopefully. For me, it's going to be this issue of triaging and prioritizing, but we don't generally have the synergy because we have the separate team calls and we have other things. We don't always have the synergy that, you know, that comes when you all are together. And I'm hearing, oh, it's not just one team that wants this. It's all these others. I mean, there's a real power in one says something, the other's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And that gives me a sense of which actions will have that big ROI. Right? Like that we can do certain things that will really have an impact. So I'm excited to take my list and for Annika and I to sit there and play with it and figure things out. So anything else? Well, I think we are at the end of our time together. Thank you so much